Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar in our summer webinar series. And today we'll be focusing on the future of global unmanned aviation. I want to thank everyone for participating, and especially all of our panelists today. Today, I'm Justin Tolles, and my colleague Cliff Sweet from the Advanced Aviation Practice will be moderating this webinar and taking you through it for about the next hour. If you're not familiar with Akin Gump and our advanced aviation practice, Cliff and I actually came from the unmanned aircraft systems world, where Cliff had a long history as a commercial aviation pilot, and then worked on a number of programs as program manager at the FAA, including the BV loss operations over the Arctic and working on the initial Pathfinder program. He then left the FAA to go up to ICAO, where he worked on remotely piloted aircraft systems, and then eventually over to the United Nations World Food Program. And luckily for us, that means Cliff made a lot of friends overseas, which we are benefiting from today. I came to the practice around the same time as Cliff about a year ago. Had a company that was a management consulting firm in the aviation sector, where we primarily focused on advanced air mobility, and prior to that worked in government relations representing the airports in the US, where we did quite a bit of focus on UAS programs. Our other colleague in their advanced aviation practice, Jennifer Richter, who leads the practice, is unable to be with us today, but she is widely known as one of the top experts in telecommunications, especially when it comes to CNS and command and control links as well. So we're happy to have everyone on this call today, and we look forward to kicking off. I'm going to turn over to Cliff, and he'll guide us through setting the stage for today's discussion.
Thank you, Justin. I'm very excited today to introduce you to a few of the key individuals I've had the pleasure to meet and work with over the past few years on the international side of unmanned aircraft regulatory and operational events. Our panelists have deep backgrounds in manned aviation, including passenger, military, and cargo transport category aircraft, and are also leaders in the field of unmanned aviation. We could easily spend the remainder of an hour with each of these individuals, but we thought you'd enjoy getting to know all of the panelists that we've invited, and are sure you'll feel their passion for our industry. As member states of ICAO, we all share a common regulatory background. Our first panelist today is from the International Air Transport Association, IATA, and supports aviation with global standards for aviation safety, security, efficiency, and sustainability. Ms. Ruby Syed is the head of ATM advocacy at IATA. She's an aviation professional and a holder of a degree in electrical engineering, who started her career as an engineer with Royal Jordanian Airlines and progressed from engineering to operational safety and management positions. She joined IATA and now drives global policy there and advocacy as well, including the rollout of safety initiatives for UAS aircraft into the airspace. She's a designated IATA member to ICAO's RPAS panel, and also leads IATA's initiatives, including the UAS think tank and expert group on unauthorized UAS. And on deck is a longtime friend, Mark Winterberg. Mark is a former Transport Canada civil aviation inspector. I met Mark when we collaborated on an international UAS treaty for scientific and search and rescue operations among the 8 Arctic states. At the same time, we both had novel projects for our respective civil aviation authorities. Mr. Winterberg is a 35-year veteran of the Royal Canadian Air Force and has decades of experience working on regulatory and UAS projects, including development, airworthiness, and flight authorizations. He's been instrumental in the development of foundational regulations for Transport Canada, the Canadian Armed Forces, the United States Air Force, and NATO. Most recently, Mr. Winterberg has gone to work for Drone Delivery Canada. Many of you have read the multiple press releases that have been issued recently about their delivery projects north of us in Canada. And our final panelist today is Mr. Sanjeev. He's the founder and CEO of Astral Aerial Solutions, and he is also CEO of Astral Aviation, a AOC holder out of Nairobi, Kenya. We're very lucky to have someone who has years of experience as a cargo operator from flying from Europe and Asia into Nairobi, and is at the forefront of bringing that technology into large unmanned aircraft cargo operations. And now I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Ms. Ruby Syed. Ruby, welcome.
Thank you very much, Cliff, for the invitation, and to you and Justin and the whole team for organizing this webinar. I am very happy to be with you all today. I want to start talking about the current state of play for air transport. The current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic has created an environment for the aviation industry that we have not seen before. Because of the pandemic, RPKs in April dropped by 95%. And this means that air transport or air travel almost came to a standstill in April. And this is not something that we have seen before. In addition, in previous crises that had an impact on aviation, travelers were able to go to other regions where the crisis was not happening. This was not the case during COVID-19. The impact of the pandemic was global and continues to be global. And this is driven by different factors, one of which is the ripple effect on operations and manufacturing caused by lockdown measures and closing of borders. The other factor is the demand shock in tourism and hospitality sectors. These factors are impacting all the actors in the aviation supply chain at different levels from an operational and a working perspective. When we look at the aviation system, for a flight to take off and land, it takes technology, equipment, and people to work together in accordance with global standards, national regulations, based on a set schedule. So as we work on the safe restart of aviation, it is not really a linear process or approach. It is taking international organizations such as IATA and ICAO, governments, industry partners, supply chain stakeholders, and airline operators all working together to ensure that we can have a safe and seamless restart. As we look at the resumption of operations and as governments start unrolling some of the travel restrictions associated with COVID-19, we are also aware of the fact that we are going back to a new normal environment. And this is creating the opportunity for us to rethink the systems that we have, to rethink the regulations. Are they still fit for purpose? And this is not something new. If we look at the history of aviation and operations and how it evolved over the past years, aviation has always been an industry with a track record of continuously reinventing itself. We have always worked for a more connected world through providing safer, better, more efficient, and more affordable air transport services. And there are numerous examples from jet engines to electronic tickets and barcoded boarding passes. The current situation with the COVID-19 emphasized the different uses for technology and digital applications. Many of us saw the recent announcements about using cleaning robots at some airports. Drones were used in places they were not used before to expedite the delivery of medical supplies to hospitals and seniors. The need for remote access to critical assets, whether for security, inspection, or disinfection, increased because of the pandemic. So all of this leads us to look at the use of unmanned aircraft in the future to transform the delivery of services when it comes to air transportation of goods and people. And since aviation continuously looks at innovation and new ideas, we are also keen on working together with the unmanned industry in order to look at the future and see what are the opportunities on the horizon. With 75 years of experience and lessons learned, the aviation industry can bring a lot to the table and help shape the skies of tomorrow. And we need to take into consideration a few things. safety is critical to ensure sustainability and public acceptance of any service related to the air transportation of people specifically. And when we look at integrating drones into the supply chain, it's going to take more than just technologies to enable that and to make that scalable to different locations and regions. And this all puts a more importance and more stress on the need for collaboration among the different stakeholders and players in the manned and unmanned industries. Therefore, as we look at today how we can address the tactical issues, the challenges we have, and recover from some of the disruptions, we are also keeping an eye on the horizon and exploring the opportunities for us to work together for a better future. Of course, we will discuss these concepts and more during the panel, and thank you again for inviting me, and I look forward to the interactive discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. And our next panelist is Mr. Mark Winterberg.
Thank you to Cliff and to Justin and to the group, and thank you for inviting me to join in the panel today. These are indeed some exciting times in the UAS industry, and we are seeing some unique opportunities emerge due to the current pandemic and potentially from the reduced air traffic resulting from the reduction in travel. This reduction in travel by all modes is also impacting current logistics capabilities and providing additional opportunities for those that can step in to fill some of those gaps. As I'm obviously looking at this from a regulatory perspective, something the DDC is happy to see in general is the movement away from single authorities and exemptions into a more structured regulatory framework. Now, obviously, this isn't COVID or pandemic specific, but some of those activities are being pushed because of the current situation. From a UAS operator perspective, this is extremely beneficial as it provides certainty to various use cases. Although this is a positive start, to date, these regulatory frameworks have largely been addressing the visual line of sight environment. That being said, we are starting to see these efforts moving forward in the BVLOS environment as well, that being the beyond visual line of sight. For example, Transport Canada recently released an NPA addressing lower risk BVLOS operations. Obviously, Canada has a unique operating environment where we have large areas with few, if any, people and extremely low volumes of air traffic, especially in the northern environments. Transport Canada has used data from various pilot projects and actual BVLOS operations conducted in these areas, both remote and isolated areas, to develop a way forward for regulating these low-risk operations. The data that it's received obviously provides not only an understanding of the risks associated with BVLOS operations, but also an understanding of the opportunities, both from a regulatory perspective and also the opportunities from what UAS can provide in these kind of environments. From Drone Delivery Canada's perspective, we've been privileged to support some of these operations. Our main effort was a beyond visual line of sight trial, and where we delivered critical supplies to a remote First Nations community located on an island. The normal mode of delivering supplies is by helicopters, with an average cost of in the neighborhood of $1,800 an hour. Our estimate is we could reduce those costs by 80 to 90% once commercialization is achieved. This trial was conducted in controlled airspace in coordination with the air navigation service provider, Nav Canada, and provided a wealth of data and lessons learned for all involved, both the regulator, the air navigation service provider, as well as ourselves. In addition to this pilot project, DDC is working on several other areas that will provide similar data to the regulators and to the industry. We're looking at advancing our ground-based detect and avoid system as part of a DAA solutions project being run by National Research Council here in Canada. We have conducted a BVLOS project in New York State with New Air at their Rome, New York test facility, Again, starting to get into the international environment, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. As we started testing of two of our larger, more capable unmanned aircraft. As a result of the lessons learned from all these activities I've mentioned, we're now in a position to start implementing commercially viable BVLOS operations. One such opportunity that we are currently in the implementation phase for is provision of delivery solutions to a remote community in Northern Ontario. As with many of these small communities, this island community has extremely limited healthcare services. So their aim with regards to COVID is basically 0 cases. They can very quickly become overwhelmed, and the best method to address the threat is simply not have contact with those outside their community. This is where DDC is stepping in with the cooperation of Global Medic to provide delivery solutions that can reduce or, in some cases, eliminate the need for people to travel to the island community, and obviously for that person-to-person contact. As a final point that I'd bring up, in addition to the efforts already discussed, one of the other activities we're doing is starting our work to enter the US market. We have several partners interested in working with us, and we've now started the aircraft cert process with the FAA. I find this interesting and important not only because it's an important market for us to enter, but this will also start helping things forward from an international perspective and entering other markets. Where I see the benefits is to start moving towards and forwarding efforts with regards to recognition of various certificates between various states, pilot licenses, aircraft certificates of airworthiness, AOCs, those kind of activities. I think the sooner we get to a point similar to, as Ruby brought up, in manned aviation, where we're all harmonized in the manned aviation side, where various certificates are recognized by the other states, I think it'll become much easier to expand UAS efforts internationally without having to reapply in each state. And I think that would do wonders for the US industries. So with that, I will end my introductory statement and look forward to the questions later on.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks also for the lead-in comment about AOC holders. So we'd like to now travel over to Nairobi and say hello to Sanjeev, who is a air cargo AOC holder in Kenya. And hello, Sanjeev, great to hear your voice.
Thank you, Cliff. And I'd like to begin by saying that I'm truly grateful for giving me the opportunity to take part in your webinar today. I'm currently based in Kenya, where I've been operating a cargo airline now for the last 20 years. As a matter of fact, we celebrated our 20th anniversary in 2020, and what a time for us to play such an impact in the air transportation business. Since March this year, we've experienced a very high growth in our air cargo manned business. And what we've actually been doing is we've been carrying a lot of COVID-19 medical items and ventilators from our hub in Nairobi, Kenya, to over 26 countries in Africa. During the same period of time, we've also expanded our network by almost 50%, and our fleet has also gone up by over 80%. So what we've actually seen is a situation which has gone out of control. If you look at Africa, it's not one country. Africa is one continent comprising of 54 countries. So accessibility, connectivity, and infrastructure are very big challenges that we have had in Africa for the last 20 years. And we've always had the worst share of problems. So the good news is that the regulations for drones have actually been promulgated last month in Kenya, and we are very grateful to the regulatory authorities for finally publishing the regulations, which is a process we've been waiting for 3 years now. And with the regulations, we are also seeing an opportunity for the UAV regulations to be harmonized within East Africa, because we have a common aviation policy which is being adopted by 6 countries in East Africa. So what that would actually mean is that if you're operating UAVs in one member state, you could also be able to extend it in the other member states. In the last 3 months, we've observed a number of UAV operations which are being used specifically towards C-19, and they are very basic. On the first part, we are actually seeing the use of UAVs for broadcasting and practicing social distancing. And this is something that we've noticed in many countries in Africa. And in the second part, we've also seen UAVs being used for spraying disinfectants at certain hotspots, like what we notice in other parts of Africa. So what we've actually seen is that there's not so much innovation with UAVs during the C-19 period. I believe what is actually happening is that everybody's trying to understand what the rest of the world is doing and trying to apply those best practices in Africa. But what we are actually doing is we're going one step further. And one of the things that we are actually doing is we're creating a supply chain platform where we can be able to use our large cargo drones for the delivery of medical items and vaccines. And when you look at the possibility of a vaccine coming out by the end of this year, and I'm an optimist, and if it doesn't come out by the end of this year, we're looking at the first quarter of next year. The biggest challenge that we're going to have is how do you transport vaccines which have a very limited shelf life because of the nature of their manufacturing process, and how do you make sure that every person in this planet is vaccinated against C-19? And one of the areas that we see of immense opportunity is for the use of drones to make sure that vaccines are transported at the last mile delivery. And coming from Africa, we believe that Africa is the perfect testing ground. This is the place where we have the worst infrastructure and a lot of challenges with regards to accessibility and connectivity. So what we believe we're going to be able to see is the use of drones for last mile delivery of vaccines. And this is something which is already being looked at by several manufacturers and operators, and we hope to be amongst one of them, but not looking at the smaller deliveries, but we're looking at the larger deliveries. We are also the pioneers of the FlyOx cargo drone, which is a drone which we plan to bring into Kenya by the end of this year. It is a revolution because it is the largest cargo drone in the world with a capacity of 2,000 kilograms, a range of 1,200 kilometers, and it can land in unpaved airfields and in water. So we're very, very excited to introduce large cargo drones and also integrate it into our manned fleet. And that is really an opportunity that we are looking forward to. And we will be looking at new horizons, whereas we are looking at Africa as being the testing ground for our UAV solutions, taking into consideration that we already have a 20-year experience. We're also going to be rolling out our large cargo drones, provided that we can secure the certification in Kenya to other parts of the world. So with this, I'd like to thank you again for organizing this webinar, and it's such a pleasure for me to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev, and congratulations on the regulations there in Kenya, and also for things moving ahead now with the FlyOx. So best of luck on those items. And now we're going to open the panel. So the first question is going to go to Ruby. And Ruby, we just wondered if you could share some of IATA's initiatives with regards to UAS, and how do they link to ICAO?
Thank you, Cliff, for the question. The work within IATA on unmanned aircraft and in UAS has evolved over the past few years. And the reason for this evolution is that at the beginning, we were focusing only on the safety aspect for manned aviation, specifically with regards to airport disruptions from the reckless use of UAS or drones. But that work has evolved for various reasons, including the fact that when we look at the future and the anticipated growth in the number of unmanned aircraft operating in the airspace and sharing it with manned aircraft, in addition to the technological transformations that we are seeing in the flight deck with the new model aircraft, we are expecting a shift from a very human-centric system for managing traffic to a system where you have a different dynamic and a more enhanced interface between humans and machines working together. Having said that, many of the provisions governing the safe operations of aircraft are designed with a human in the loop carrying out all the routine tasks. But this is expected to change and evolve with technologies and systems as we move forward. In addition, this evolution in technology is going at a pace that is faster than what we have seen in previous years. And this begs the question of how can we develop regulations and policies that meet the pace of technologies and their evolution. And that was the essence of many of the papers that were presented to the ICAO 40th Assembly session in 2019. And as an outcome of that assembly, discussions and the papers and the conclusions that resulted, we have been working with manned and unmanned industry stakeholders to address the integration of unmanned aircraft into airspace and what that will take, looking at the interface, UTM, ATM, other parameters and requirements. And the group is now focusing on an initial area, focusing on the flight rules review, whether the flight rules are fit for purpose, the existing ones are fit for purpose, or whether we need an extension or adaptation, or if we need to rethink a few things, including also airspace classification. This effort is, of course, done in collaboration with ICAO, but it's industry working with ICAO and supporting the development of requirements and standards. Of course, this goes beyond the work of the RPAS panel, which was mentioned earlier in the webinar, because the RPAS panel is focusing on a certain scope, and this goes beyond the scope and addresses use cases related to unmanned aircraft, looking at advanced air mobility, increasing number of aircraft operating in the air, and all of these factors are being considered in the work that we are doing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ruby. Appreciate it. And the next question is for Mark. So, Mark, please share some of the background of your regulatory work and how that led to Drone Delivery Canada's Beyond Visual Line of Sight operations.
Thanks, Justin. I think the key message for the regulatory work, there's a few of them. First is start early. From a Drone Delivery Canada perspective, we initially engaged Transport Canada in 2014, but it was important to start early so we understood the box in which we were operating, right? And then the next thing comes with cooperation with the regulator. Both as an operator, I've seen it from the operator side of this, as a regulator side. There's never a benefit of going in the door, poking the regulator in the chest and saying, this is what we want. It's always more effective to be cooperative, understand the box you're working in, and then figure out, can we push this side of the box out or that side of the box, or how can we expand the box? Obviously, as I said, we started 2014, so the other point is it takes time. It takes time to build a level of trust with the regulator, so the regulator is comfortable with providing you approvals to expand that box and to move it outwards. And for us, eventually, to the point of doing beyond visual line of sight operations. And the final is probably the issue of crawl, walk, run. Many operators want to go from 0 to 100 in 0.2 seconds, and you just can't do that in the aviation industry. You have to learn. You have to learn from your mistakes. You have to show the regulator that you can learn from your mistakes. And by doing that, that's how you develop that confidence from the regulator that you can conduct a safe operation, which in the end is their aim, is to ensure that that's what you're doing.
Thank you, Mark. It's great advice, and as a former regulator and sharing that background with you, it is something that we should all take to heart. Next question is for Sanjeev. Sanjeev is an international transport cargo operator. How do you plan to supplement your operations to include the large drones for Pan-African operations?
You mentioned the FlyOx cargo drone, a project we worked together with the Kenyan Civil Aviation Authority. What are your next steps?
Thank you. FlyOx is our flagship project. because of the fact that it's designed to transport cargo over long distances, which also includes cross-border operations, and the ability to land in unpaved airfields and also in locations which are inaccessible. Currently, our manned aircraft fleet has many limitations because our responsibility ends when we arrive at the airport at the destination. And one of the challenges we've noticed is the time it takes from the airport to reach the final point of delivery. So about 3 years ago, our journey started in trying to identify the right cargo drone for our company. And after many, many searches, which took us to China, which took us to various parts of the world, we actually found that the large cargo drone that we were looking for was made in Barcelona in Spain. So we immediately got in touch with the innovator. We had a look at the plans, and we felt that the FlyOps cargo drone could be something that we could actually be able to start our journey in terms of last mile delivery. And as time goes on, try and expand on the cargo carriage capability, because currently the capacity is 2 tons, but we would like to see the opportunity of flying larger cargo drones, which can even go up to 20,000 kilograms. So what we did was we engaged with our Civil Aviation Authority. We shared with them some of the data and technical specs of the FlyOps cargo drone with one very simple objective. The objective is to certify and get the aircraft under our operating specs. So as a cargo airline, we've actually taken our experience in operating flights for the last 20 years, and we put our neck on the line by accepting full responsibility for the FlyOps cargo drone, and accepting that if we can be given the permission to get the FlyOps in our operating specs, then what we would do is we would actually undertake a 3-month pilot project in Kenya, where we would demonstrate how the FlyOps cargo drone would be able to operate under different use conditions for different types of clients, starting with the humanitarian and the aid agency. So we've actually been able to secure certain letters of intent for the use of the large cargo drone. And what we are hoping to do now is that since the regulations have now been promulgated, we are now expecting to get permission for the FlyOps to be brought to Kenya. Currently, the FlyOps is already doing some tests and some pilot flights in Spain. And what we plan to do is to actually join them in Spain in August as soon as our international airport is open. And then with the permission of the Civil Aviation Authority, we would now like to bring the FlyOps into Kenya for pilot flights. And it is our objective that by the first quarter of 2021, we would be able to start commercial operations for the aid and humanitarian sector, and also looking at the possibility of trying to see how we can integrate the FlyOps cargo drone with our fleet by looking at specifically targeting the transportation of vaccines in remote locations in Africa.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. And for the next question, we'll start with Ruby, but really this is kind of a foundational issue that we experience across the advanced aviation sector. And that is, what are the main drivers for achieving the right balance between innovation and safety? And like I said, we'll start with Ruby, but then our other panelists can feel free to jump in as well.
Thank you, Justin, for the question. And I think this is a question that everybody is trying to answer, and we might arrive at different answers even during the panel today. And it's important to arrive at this balance because we want to make sure that we have the appropriate safety standards and safeguards in place, but at the same time, we don't want to stifle innovation. We want to foster innovation because the transformation is going to be beneficial for all players, for all airspace users, and of course for the end users and the consumers, i.e. the flying public. And Mark mentioned a little bit in his previous remarks about making sure that there is a trust between the operator and the regulations, and that involves being inclusive and involving the regulators early on, as Mark mentioned. And we have to keep in mind that innovation is not about only technologies or systems that we put in place. Innovation is also about how we approach the development of policy and the development of regulations. And that is where we need to rethink the way we engage the regulators, we need to make sure that when we talk about policy and regulations and how we can ensure they keep up with the pace of technology, that this involves inclusive engagement. This involves making use of trials. For example, what Sanjeev was referring to. How can we make use of the data and the lessons learned coming out of the trials to drive the regulations? How can we make sure that we take a performance-based approach? And this requires an early engagement and involvement. It also includes an engagement across the multi-modes of transportation. And this is where the inclusivity goes beyond even the aviation, let's say, usual suspects or usual players, because some of the new players in the airspace do not come from the aviation industry. But there needs to be a consistent dialogue and engagement with them as we develop the future requirements. And this is why we see great value in working together with the unmanned industry and the new players in the airspace as we define the new system requirements. And even within IATA, and also ICAO is doing the same thing, we are going beyond the usual membership in our groups in order to ensure that we maintain that harmonized approach, but also bring together the views, because there is a learning opportunity here for both sides. And at the same time, we need the different expertise from everybody around the table. And as we move forward, as the systems continue to evolve, one thing that we need to keep in mind is that new technologies are going to have to interface at some point with existing systems. And how is that interface is going to work? What are the issues and challenges? What are the new assumptions that we need to take into consideration? What is the new operating environment? We cannot answer these questions in isolation. We need to work together, and we need to keep the regulatory bodies in the loop from the beginning, so that we can not only have an accommodation of new airspace users, but an integration into the airspace.
Thanks, Ruby. Mark or Sanjeev, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure, Justin, it's Mark. Obviously, I'll take it from the UAS operator point of view, and focus on a couple of those things that Ruby just pointed out. As I mentioned my previous question, the issue or discussed, the issue of inclusivity is critical. We have to work together with the regulators so that we can find that balance. We have to be able to provide them data. We have to be able to support them. As an example, on one of the trials that Drone Delivery Canada did, the regulator was concerned with radiomagnetic, so RMI or EMI, electromagnetic interference. So we offered to, and not just at the start and the end point, but also through the flight. So we put a spectrum analyzer as in the cargo compartment of our aircraft, and actually flew that through the route and provided them the data. Again, going back to what Ruby said about working together with them to come to a similar aim. The right balance from the operator on innovation and safety comes back to, I think, their risk assessment process. Those processes have to be foundational within the company. Everybody within the company has to understand those processes, as well as you need to have a good leadership setting the stage for ensuring the risks are managed appropriately. That obviously doesn't mean no risk. It means the acceptable level of risk to allow the safety, which is paramount, to be achieved, while at the same time allowing that the innovation to move forward. The other thing I'd mention on that we have to make sure of, though, is we do have the innovation, we do have the technology, but there's 100 years of lessons learned in traditional aviation, and we can't forget about those as well. We just have to make sure we take those portions of that history that are applicable, the training, the human factors, those kind of issues, and make sure that we're putting that into our equation of innovation and safety. As Ruby mentioned, there's some people that are new to aviation. The first thing they have to do is learn about aviation and some of the history and the trials, tribulations, and the lives lost, so that they can safely move their innovation forward.
Okay, and the next question is back to you again, Mark. And Just wanted to follow up on safety, and you've already highlighted some of the things that Drone Delivery Canada focuses on, but you earlier mentioned your firm is considering cross-border operations. So, we're both familiar with Annex 19, and can you talk about how maybe you've extracted some sections from those SARPs and how those might apply to cross-border ops? Thanks.
Thanks, Cliff. I think one of the key items when we start getting into more complex operations, whether that either be a complex environment or getting into the international environment, it's almost getting back to the traditional aviation. We need to start having an operation that understands the risks and understanding how to address those. I think a large portion of that is having a working, effective safety management system as part of the company, or an SMS. For example, at Drone Delivery Canada, that's one of the first things we created. It was obviously rough at the time because there weren't any for UAV operators, so we created it, but at least it was the start of a system, right? And it goes back to the comment about, it doesn't mean you're not going to have incidents and accidents. The question is, are you going to learn from those incidents and accidents, or are you going to go flying tomorrow and have the same accident? One of the things that we had at one of our trials that the Transport Canada inspector stated to us was that one of the worst things is for him to not see anything go wrong, because then he has no idea how that particular operator will address a problem when it does arise, because every operator has problems of some sort, and the regulator wants to see how they react to that situation. And again, having an effective SMS system in there, scaled appropriately for the operation. Obviously, one size doesn't fit all. I think is key to addressing the various use cases. An example that I would use is we're just starting testing for two new aircraft. One being our Robin, which is a VTOL, both a vertical takeoff, but also has a wing for forward flight. We're starting testing for that shortly, as well as our Condor, which is a converted manned helicopter, 400 pounds of cargo capability, greater than 100 nautical mile delivery range. But before we even got into the how we're going to start these and how we're going to test these, we went through an SMS process. What are going to be the problems? Where are we going to do these testing? As an example, for the larger aircraft, made the decision that we're actually going to do that in a test range because we want to make sure we're mitigating the risk appropriately based on the risks involved. So that, going back to the main focus of the question, I think an SMS is key. If you have that, I think most international regulators understand SMS processes. And if you can prove to them that you do your risk management well and your safety management well, that's going to help your case when you want to operate in that country.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And Sanjeev, do you have a follow-up as a manned operator? Is there anything you took over from your SMS or operational risk assessments to your drone program?
A very good question. Safety is very important for us. Having operated for the last 20 years, we've got a very comprehensive safety management system. And at the same time, also, we believe that operating in Africa has a lot of risks. But what we've been able to do for the last 20 years is to have a culture of safety, which is more important than anything else that we do in this organization. And what we have done is that we've actually taken the same lessons of safety and we've applied it into our UAV division. And we're very happy to note that the culture that exists in our organization is also now mitigating into the UAV division. And we believe that one of the challenges that we will actually have at the initial phase is relating to safety. We've already looked at various risk management options. And we believe that because the use of large cargo drones is a new technology, we believe that the the safety case will be best looked at when we are doing our 3-month pilot project, because these are the opportunities that we will actually have to improve our safety management systems, while at the same time also carrying out pilot projects in different experiences and different environments. So for sure, safety is very, very important. But the other part which is also very important, more than safety, is the training, because when you actually have training, it's a part of your safety, and it even enhances safety. And one of the things that we've done in Kenya is that we've established the first training academy for drone pilots. And this is something which is very important, because we can only instill a culture of safety when we have actually made sure that the training is available at a low cost. And we've been very fortunate that 3 of my colleagues in the drones business have actually been trained in South Africa. So starting from last year, we set up a training academy in Kenya. And our first objective was to make sure that we train the regulator, because in the case of the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority and a lot of civil aviations that we have in East Africa, training is a very big problem, because a lot of the regulators have not been trained. And this is a reality, and we believe that we can bring in the training by bringing in the best practices from South Africa, which is very well renowned for drone training. And with the help of the South Africans, we want to bring in the training syllabus and the training facilities in Kenya, so that not only can we provide the training to our regulator, but we can also be able to provide it to any drone enthusiast who's very, very keen on taking up a career in flying drones. And we believe that if we have a great training program, it will also improve safety. And this is a very important step that we're actually taking in our organization. And it's a very important vertical, and we believe in safety, but saying it is not enough. We have to make sure that we provide the resources and provide the facilities for people to be trained, so that they can actually be able to instill the same level of safety that we have been following in our organization.
Thanks, Sanjeev. And actually, I have a follow-up question for you. I know a lot of us have read about the massive locust swarms in East Africa and the massive impacts that they can have over there. And I'm just kind of curious, is that an area where you can use unmanned technology to mitigate that?
Yes, definitely. What we've actually seen with the desert locusts is they've actually created a lot of havoc with our agricultural resources in East Africa. But it's not an African problem only. We're actually seeing drones, we're actually seeing locusts in countries like India, where they're also causing a lot of havoc with the farmlands and with the agricultural produce, and something has to be done. So what we did was that in February this year, we came up with a very innovative solution on how we can deal with the locust problem by using drones, which would actually enable us to spray the insecticides against the locusts at night. And this is a very innovative approach, because traditionally, a lot of organizations, including the FAO, have actually been using crop dusters, such as the air tractor, to spread the chemicals onto the locust swarms. And this is really not recommended, because it is dangerous, very harmful for the pilot. But at the same time, also, we're also seeing that the rate of effectiveness is not that great, because you see that the fixed-wing aircrafts are spraying all over the place, even in places where there are no locusts. And what we believe is to actually make an impact. And by only spraying where it is absolutely necessary, and our technology is relating to spraying against the locusts at night, because at night they're usually on the ground. And we believe that anytime from 7 in the evening till 5 in the morning is when we will be able to target our impact spraying against the locusts. And we believe that we will actually have a better success rate, because using the drones, we will actually be able to not only fly at night, but what we will also be able to do is to reach areas which cannot be reached or cannot be accessed by fixed wing aircrafts. And these are especially in regions such as where you have valleys, and also where there's a high human population. And this is where we believe that we will have an impact using our drones. So what we have done is that we've already submitted our paper to the government of Kenya, and we're expecting that we will be given the opportunity of doing our testing project by the end of this month. And we will be able to scale up using a multiple number of drones, so that we can actually be able to deal with the menace that we're actually having with the desert locusts.
Thank you for that, Sanjeev. All right, next question is for Ruby. Ruby, you have a unique position there as being involved with the trade association. I know a lot of people aren't familiar with the vast reach of IATA, but perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what's next on the horizon for IATA regarding UAS or RPAS operations, and then even maybe looking a little further ahead of that for programs and partnerships in the pipeline.
Thank you for that question, Cliff. And for anyone who's not familiar with the scope of IATA, IATA is an association that represents airlines worldwide. We actually represent over 80% of worldwide air traffic for commercial aviation. But at the same time, we are taking a vested interest in the expanded use of unmanned aircraft for several reasons, including what I have mentioned earlier in the webinar, but also because our membership airlines that are operating across the world are also exploring the use of unmanned aircraft to complement their business offering, to complement their services. And that's why we are taking a holistic look at this because it serves our members, because it serves the future of air transport, and it serves the looking at innovative ways of enabling connectivity across the world. So in terms of looking ahead and looking to the future, of course, at the moment, the most urgent and pressing need for the aviation industry is to recover and restart within, because of all the parameters and the impacts that we have seen due to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, in times of crises, it's also we also have motivation to think about new ways of how we can operate. And as traffic levels are lower, we are as an industry, we are also rethinking the system and redefining what normal operations for aviation is going to look like. And that means also exploring what will be the future of air transport, what are the new partnerships that we can foster. So going beyond the group that I mentioned, which is working on the integration of UAS into airspace, we are also working with different platforms and groups for that are key in the unmanned industry to have a closer collaboration as we move forward. At the same time, the situation with the COVID-19 pandemic has brought together different players across the aviation supply chain. So we are working more collaboratively together. We are working closer. We are engaging more regularly, more frequently, because we all have the same goal. We all have the same aspiration. And that is creating additional partnerships in different areas. And as we move forward, one of the key focus topics for us will be how we can enhance resiliency for aviation. And that will involve rethinking and looking at the regulatory framework, the policy development. Can we use technology and digital applications to enhance resiliency? All of these factors and parameters that we need to look at when we think about a better system for tomorrow's operations.
Okay, thank you very much for that enlightening answer, Ruby. And so, ladies and gentlemen, our hour has gone by so quickly, but we still have time for some closing statements. So we'll reverse order on the panelists now, and we would just like to give you a couple of minutes for a closing statement. Sanjeev, you're up first. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. I will resonate with what Ruby has said on the importance of collaboration. Collaboration is very important between all players in the UAV industry, not only between manufacturers and service providers, but also with the regulator and the stakeholders. We value the input that ICAO and IATA has actually played with the regulations. But going forward, there's still a lot more work that is required, which needs to be done, especially when it comes to working very closely with the civil aviation authorities in Africa. And we encourage greater cooperation, greater participation. And as a drone operator, we also value the importance of collaboration and consolidation. And we will be working towards reaching out to the members of the community so that we can be able to bring some of the best practices in other parts of the world into Africa and be able to use some of these technologies in Africa. And this is something that is a unique opportunity, and we look forward to being a part of the space.
Thank you, Sanjeev. And Mark, closing thoughts.
Thanks, Cliff. First, again, I'd like to say thanks for inviting me to be part of the panel. From a Drone Delivery Canada perspective, we see some great opportunities currently to provide some of the public good as well as increasing safety, particularly in the issue of transportation of goods and supplies, which includes medical supplies and testing, as Sanjeev mentioned, is going on in Africa. As we look towards more international operations, I think some of the things we've already heard about, I think we really need to look at increasing that international harmonization, including some of the work that Ruby and IATA are doing. There needs to be continued international standards development. There's a fair bit of that going on, and those standards that are being developed need to be recognized and ideally recognized internationally. And then, as I sort of mentioned before, I think a key thing, and this is going to go back again to what Sanjeev was talking about, is to start that work to look towards those sort of recognition programs of various certificates between states. Initially, that'll probably come out in some sort of bilateral agreement between states, but eventually, if that can be an international harmonized process of, do I need to get my RPAS pilot license in Canada and then go down to the US and get a Part 107 license, or perhaps whatever license is going to be required under Part 135, or can there be some sort of harmonization recognition of those licenses? So along with working the regulatory structures and frameworks in various states, I think it needs to be that international focus of a harmonization will help the industry move forward as well. And again, thanks for allowing me to be part of the panel.
Yes, it's really been a pleasure, and thanks for joining us, Mark. And Ruby, likewise, a pleasure having you with us. And with that, you get the last word.
Thank you very much, Cliff. Again, thanks to you and Justin for inviting me and for organizing this panel. I really enjoyed listening to all the points that Mark and Sanjeev made. And from my side, just in closing, I think to emphasize what the other panelists said, we need a holistic approach that can ensure scalability of the use of unmanned aircraft and sustainability for the future. And that means working together with the regulators, working together with closer ties between manned and unmanned industry players and emerging airspace users. At the end of the day, from the presentations we heard during the webinar today, we can see the social benefit of using unmanned aircraft and what that could bring. So for it to be sustainable, it needs to be safe. And at the same time, we also need to work together because there's a lot of data from the trials that we can make use of that can drive regulations and policies and that can help us build the requirements for the future systems to integrate both types of operations and accommodate the different types of airspace users. And with that, I want to thank you again for the opportunity. And this has been a very enlightening and great discussion with the panelists. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sanjeev, Mark, and Ruby, and to Cliff, and then also a very special thank you to Natasha Hill and Lindsay Plummer, who are both at Aiken Gump and help us make these webinars a reality. This is very enlightening to me, and I know it was for Cliff as well. And we really thank our panelists and really all of the participants for joining in. This is the second webinar in our three-part series here. So we have the third and final coming up, which will be focused on advanced air mobility. So keep an eye out in the next week or so for an announcement and date for that one. But on that webinar, we're going to be taking a look at the air taxi and air metro models, looking at the certification paths for that from the regulatory perspective, and then also kind of some of the considerations on community integration at the state and local level as well. So with that, thank you everyone for participating, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks.